Hi, I'm Jason Scoggins with itsonthegrid.com and therap.com. This is Sundance Project 2012, and we're sitting here with John Weinbach and Marius Markavicius, excuse me.
Almost
Almost
close.
got that one, who have a documentary in the competition here at Sundance. It's called The Other Dream Team, and why don't you guys tell us a little bit about what that is?
Well, yeah, it's a documentary about the 1992 Lithuanian national basketball team. It's mainly a story about their journey from behind the Iron Curtain to Lithuania's independence in '91, and then this ragtag effort they put together to get the team to their first Olympics as a free nation. And they went on to the Olympics and kind of under the spotlight of America's Dream Team, which kind of stole the show at that time. They battled and scraped, and along with help from the Grateful Dead, who sponsored the team, they heard of their plight. They had no money. The Grateful Dead got behind them, made these awesome tie-dye shirts. In fact, John's wearing one of the tie-dye shirts that are a big part of our film, actually. They got to the Olympics and fought and scraped, and in a twist of irony, they beat Russia in the bronze medal game. So it was like they basically beat their former oppressor and won a bronze, and that bronze really helped, put the country on the map. In American culture, like bronze is a third place, and it's sort of like you lost.
Right.
But to that country at that moment in time, I mean, that bronze was as sweet as gold,
yeah.
and basically you couldn't have gotten any better than that. So that's the story in a nutshell.
That's great. How did you guys hook up to get the thing rolling?
It's a great story. I mean, as it turned out, we're both from Los Angeles, grew up in LA, and we didn't know it at the time, but we have all these friends in common. And as it turned out, one of Marius's oldest friends is the stepbrother of the wife of a friend of mine, if you can follow that. And then we met at a birthday party, and I was producing an ESPN documentary at the time. And our friend in common said, "Oh, you got to talk to my friend Marius. He's obsessed with this story. You've probably never heard of it, like the Lithuanian basketball team." And I have nothing to hide. I'm a massive sports geek, and I said, "Sure, Sharutis Marciulionis, Arvydas Sabonis,
Right.
the Grateful Dead. I love that story. I've loved that story forever." And
He was the only guy, sorry to interrupt, but I'm Lithuanian, so these guys I followed growing up, and they were like my heroes, but he's one of the only Americans I've ever, rattled off a couple of these names. He's like, Marciulionis, Sabonis,
He's my favorite.
From like the late 80s, early 90s, and he's just a sports encyclopedia, and I knew right away I'd pretty much found the right match to help produce the movie. So.
Yeah, I mean,
Did you already have a sense of what the movie would be by the time you guys were talking at that point?
Yeah, I mean, generally, it's about this team in '92, and really, going back to '88, the full story goes full circle from 1988 to '92. In the '88 Olympics, these athletes played for the Soviet Union. They were behind the Iron Curtain. Lithuania was occupied in World War II. So all of Lithuania's athletes had to play for the Soviet Union. Lithuania didn't exist, essentially. And in '88, they put this amazing team together, and they actually beat the United States and won the gold medal. And 4 of the starting 5 of the Soviet Union team were Lithuanians. So it was sort of this bittersweet. They won this gold, but it wasn't for them. It was like for this machinery, and which everyone in the world perceived as like the enemy.
Right.
And these guys were sort of the face of that, even though they had nothing. They wanted no part of it. They wanted to play for their country. So of course the world changed very rapidly. The Berlin Wall fell, and in '91 Lithuania got its independence, and that's when they got to put their own team together. And so when we said that bronze was sweeter than gold, that's the full kind of. They had a gold medal already.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time. I mean, these guys, if you were an American growing up in the '80s, the Soviets were the big bad guys in everything.
I remember quite well.
Yeah, I mean,
Ivan Drago and Red Dawn and all
Sure.
these.
If they could have a bad guy in a movie, it would always be a Russian. And so, as a sports fan, who were the worst guys? The Russians. They beat the Americans at our game, and sort of in 4 years, these guys went from being, icons of evil in the sports context to like the faces of freedom representing Lithuania.
Yeah, wearing Grateful Dead shirts and basically like a hippie freedom movement. So I mean, the Grateful Dead's slogan, "What a long strange trip," is sort of became like their slogan too.
So you got music from the Grateful Dead and the T-shirts and all the imagery. Did you reach out to them and have them get involved in financing, or was it more later in the process?
Not financing wise, they were amazing. We interviewed Mickey Hart, the drummer of the Dead, and they provided us with music. 6 songs are featured in the film,
Wow,
and we could never have made it without. They gave us an incredible
boost. I mean, we also had the very, very enthusiastic and wonderful support of the most famous, arguably the tallest Grateful Dead fan, and certainly the most famous to basketball fans, Bill Walton. Mm-hmm. And Bill Walton was, you know, in his role as a basketball analyst and just, you know, being Bill Walton, he was aware of the basketball element of it, and he was kind of a, you know, pretty important connector between the Dead and the Lithuanian team. And early on, he was maybe our third interview, and he was very instrumental in helping us get in touch with the Dead. And so we had Bill Walton, we had the goodwill from the Dead, and it really kind of, as we went along making this film, we just kind of one positive step, you know, took another, and we generated momentum. And that's kind of how, that was the story of the film.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Sundance is just getting started. I know you've been here for several years in a row with some pictures that you've produced. Do you have a sense of how different it'll be on the documentary side versus the feature side?
Well, I'm excited to find out. I wish I could make some predictions, but it's a very different world. I mean, speaking for what's going to happen at Sundance, you know, you never know what's going to happen at Sundance, but the process of filmmaking was so different and, you know, in a lot of ways more difficult. And this movie took 3 years to make from beginning to end.
During the
I was literally making this movie on the side while producing Douchebag and Like Crazy. Mm-hmm. And this movie was always continuing to happen, and we'd have another interview or another trip to Lithuania or a trip to, you know, we traveled all over the U.S. to interview people and basically on an international manhunt to find all these guys. And
how tough was that?
It was it was a challenge both logistically, just, you know, arranging it, because it's not like, I mean, just as an example, I worked on this film for ESPN on the Los Angeles Raiders, and, you know, and we had Ice Cube was involved as a director, but we had almost everyone was in the Southern California area. This one, not a single person. We didn't have one interview in Los Angeles, and we're both based in LA. Our camera is based in LA, so. I think we should go through the list. It was something like 15 to 20 cities we did interviews in.
And then in Europe, we were in Italy, we were in Lithuania. You know, we had a guy in the Ukraine. I mean, just unbelievable.
It was a logistical challenge. It was a financial challenge. It was a practical challenge. We hired cameramen in different countries, audio guys. One of the nice things, another part of the story that is sort of unique, is we have a kind of a secondary storyline where one of the best young players in the world now is actually a Lithuanian center named Jonas Valanciunas, and he was drafted number 5 in the 2011 NBA draft by the Toronto Raptors, and he's actually born in 1992.
Wow.
And his whole career being able to go free to the NBA without a question, without hesitation, he's sort of the living legacy of the guys that we feature in the film.
That's great. And he's born in 92. He's basically the first generation born in free Lithuania and to grow up free. Mm-hmm. And we parallel his story with these guys. One of these, Arvydas Sabonis, a guy featured in our film, was drafted in 1986 by the NBA, and you know we showed in our film, and I asked him, you know, how that must have been amazing. What were your emotions? How did you feel? And he's like, he's like, at the NBA draft, I felt nothing. He said, someone told me a couple of months later that I'd been drafted, and I didn't even know what it meant. If some team far away wanted me, but I knew I could never go, and he didn't go. He ended up coming in 1995 as a 31-year-old rookie, and, you know, 10 years of his prime. And during that time, like Bill Walton, a lot of people say he was the best center in the world possibly, and
wow.
He had an amazing career in Europe. But, you know, to see what he went through, and then this kid who was born free and, you know, went through the whole, you know, machinery of a young basketball player now in a free society and world, and as a 19-year-old to come to New York City, and we followed the story, and I was in the room with him putting the tie on, and his mother talking about, you know, she was pregnant basically in the time of this turmoil and the changing over of the entire country, and it was very emotional through line and I think amazing parallel to show how far things have come in just, you know, 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. You mentioned just in passing a second ago challenges financing this film. How different was the financing process for this movie compared to the other movies, in particular the feature stuff you've done?
You know, it's not that different really, because all the films that I've done and the films I produced were independently financed, and we scraped and scratched and got independent, you know, financiers to do those movies for small budgets. Mm-hmm. And we had to scrape and scratch on those and have a lot of people contribute, and you know, this was the same process, and you know, we had a lot of different ideas about who would finance it, and ultimately our film was financed by a charitable organization called the Basketball Future Foundation that's based in Lithuania.
Oh, great.
That was founded by these basketball players. And when I first started talking to the subjects, the athletes, about the idea, they were just, we quickly realized how important the story was and is to the country and to the people out there, and how it can be like an educational tool also, to going forward. And so basically this group decided to finance the film and to kind of keep control of it and to be able to use it as a tool out there, and the profits from the movie are going to go to the charity, and it's promotes youth basketball.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in a sort of American movie context, imagine if Rocky times Miracle was the country's founding sports myth, and it was all true. This is that story in basketball. So it has politics, it has freedom, it has identity, it has
pop culture with the
pop culture, and it was something that was it's so of its time. It's so it's still current now. I mean, we talk about this all the time. Is like we've forgotten in our era, because we're kind of obsessed with terrorism or the economic downturn. But in the late '80s and early '90s, the biggest story in the world was the end of communism and nuclear war. Right. So these guys were right in the middle of that, and they passed through it. And at the time, the fall of communism was a massive story, and these guys were the faces of it. So it was one of these places where, sports and politics and all the kind of cultural currents came together, and it's very important.
As a current event, what's happening in the Middle East and the Arab Spring, and small countries, revolting against oppression and fighting for freedom, and I mean it's exactly the same thing, and so we really hope that people can watch our movie and people out there can watch it and see it as an example, because when Lithuania got their independence, things got worse right away. It was really bad. The Russian mafia had moved in, and it was basically chaos. I mean, total instability, and they had to fight and scrap and and stick with it. And 20 years later, it's they've become a part of Europe again. They're part of the EU. Their education rates are high. I mean, it's it's still a growing country, an emerging young country, but we hope that people around the world who are especially in like Egypt and Libya, they can look at this as an example of how quickly things can turn to positive direction, and I'm sure that in some amount of years we're going to see amazing stories about the Libyan soccer team or Egyptian wrestling teams or whatever. It's sports can really be a catalyst for cultural identity and change and all of that.
That's great. So what's up next for you guys? More documentaries for you? You've come out of the narrative feature side, so...
Yeah, I have a few feature projects in the works. I have a couple scripts that I've written. I have a book that I've optioned that I'm very interested in trying to put together a narrative feature. I to be honest, I'm leaning more back towards the narrative side.
And as a director, though, I mean, this
and that's why it's like I really enjoyed the experience directing. I loved producing the movies too, but my dream has always been to be a director, and this was a great experience. And now I think I'm definitely ready to take the plunge into directing a narrative feature. So that's the goal.
Cool. How about you, John?
Some combination of both. I would love to do. I have got a scripted sports flavored television project that I would absolutely love to do next, and then really doing more compelling nonfiction programming, whether it's in television form or documentary form. As a director or producer, I'm sort of comfortable in either way, and telling great stories in a sports context, ideally.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, thanks for coming and sitting down with us, guys. Really appreciate it. For itsonthegrid.com and therap.com, I'm Jason Scoggins. Thanks.